America's power grid could, quote, collapse as green energy pixie farts continue to fail. So says analysts at Goldman Sachs, who warn the next so-called heat dome, a periodic weather phenomenon, could overwhelm the power grid for 13 mid-Atlantic states, making up 65 million people, one-fifth of the republic. Other grids are not much better. The grid covering Minnesota to Louisiana could hit, quote, critical thresholds next year. ERCOT, covering Texas, has an additional 2 years. Goldman blames the, quote, lower effective capacity of so-called renewable power, as in solar and windmills don't work very well. They generate much less power than advertised, and they crap out when it's cloudy outside or the wind does not blow. Now, depending on location, some solar and wind only generate 1/10 so-called nameplate capacity, which is what they promised when they got the money from taxpayers or ratepayers. In fact, renewables throw away a lot of the power they do produce, so-called curtailment in the lingo. California estimates 7% of solar is thrown away. Arizona and Colorado estimates 10%. ERCOT in Texas says some solar nodes curtail up to 75% of what paltry power they do drip out. Despite all this, wind and solar have been incredibly successful at siphoning taxpayer money, reinforced by the media-manufactured climate crisis. The Climate Policy Institute estimates climate spending went from $300 billion a year in 2018 to over $500 billion a year now. Worldwide, this balloons to nearly $2 trillion a year, with globalists at the IMF, World Bank, and UN trying to double that, all coming out of your pocket. Now, this starved reliable energy, fossil fuels, nuclear, and hydro. So between 1980 and 2000, so before the climate crisis went into overdrive, we increased fossil fuel, nuclear, and hydro by 1,250 gigawatts in the U.S. But in the following 20 years, fossils, nukes, and hydro actually fell, only partly replaced by 400 gigs of wind and solar. So we went from 1,250 to 400, and 400 that only sometimes works. This is driving up costs. A University of Chicago study found renewables increase power costs by 1.4 times. More important, it's driving blackouts. The Urban Climate Lab estimates annual blackouts in the U.S. have tripled since 2015. Just last week, the Department of Energy warned we could see a 100-fold increase in blackouts as AI data centers send energy demand soaring while we limp along on wind and solar. Data centers already consume more power than the country of Ireland. The IEA projects that in 5 years, AI data centers will consume more energy than Japan. Happily, voters are figuring this all out. A new Pew Center poll finds support for wind and solar is collapsing, dropping from nearly 80% of voters wanting to expand wind and solar at the expense of fossils in 2020 to just 60% 5 years later. Among Republicans, it went from 65% to just 33% today. Meanwhile, the percent of Americans wanting more oil, coal, and natural gas, so drill, baby, drill, has doubled since 2020, going from 20% to 39%, which is closing in on half. Among Republicans, is actually 69%. Even nuclear power is getting a second look, with 69% of Republicans and even a majority of Democrats wanting more nukes so the lights stay on. So what's next? Brought to you by I Trust Capital. America used to have reliable and cheap power. The green boondoggle has now put us decades in the hole. Given what's coming, we'll need to pour trillions into energy that actually works, coal and gas, nukes and hydro, and quit with the pixie farts. A new episode of the Roundup podcast just dropped. Search Peter St. Ange wherever you enjoy your podcasts. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.